Life in the Middle Ages was not just hard, it was relentless. Most people were born into poverty, lived through disease, war, hunger, and superstition, and died without ever traveling more than a few miles from their village. Comfort was a luxury almost no one had, and survival meant enduring challenges we can barely imagine today. From the moment you woke up, your life was ruled by labor. Most medieval people were peasants, bound to the land of a noble. Their day started at dawn and ended at dusk, working the fields with primitive tools and their bare hands. Rain or shine, sick or healthy, they worked until their bodies gave out, and they had no weekends, no vacations, and no labor protections. Your reward for a lifetime of back-breaking work? Enough food to survive, if you were lucky. Speaking of food, forget feasts and banquets. Most people ate the same thing every single day. A stew called pottage, made from vegetables and whatever scraps were available. Bread was the main food, but it was coarse, dense, and often full of grit from stone ground flour that wore down teeth. Meat was rare unless you were wealthy, and when it did appear on a poor man's plate, it was often spoiled. Salt and smoke preserved it, but the taste was still enough to make your stomach churn. Fresh water was a gamble. Rivers and wells were filled with waste, so people drank weak beer, even children. Not because they wanted to, but because it was safer than the water. Hygiene was another forgotten concept. Bathing was rare and often feared. People believed that washing too often could weaken you or let disease enter through open pores. Lice and fleas were everywhere. Clothes were rarely washed. Most homes were one-room huts shared with animals. The floor was just dirt, and straw used for bedding and covering. The floor was changed so infrequently it rotted beneath them. The smell of medieval towns was legendary. Waste was thrown into the streets, and chamber pots were emptied out of windows. The streets were literal rivers of human filth. If you got sick, things only got worse. Medical knowledge was based on superstition. Most people believed illness came from bad air or an imbalance in the body's humors. Doctors treated fevers by cutting veins and draining blood. Leeches were applied to draw out the supposed bad fluids. There were no sterilization methods, no anesthesia, and no understanding of infection. A toothache could become a death sentence. A fever could turn into a funeral. And if someone caught something contagious, they were often nailed inside their home to die out of sight. And then there was war. Life was dangerous enough already, but conflict between kings, lords, and rival factions made survival even harder. Battles were brutal and bloody. Armor only helped if you could afford it. Most soldiers wore cloth or leather and fought with whatever weapons they could afford or scavenge. Injuries were rarely survivable. If you didn't die in battle, infection or exposure usually finished the job, and the villages in the path of an army suffered the most. Crops were burned, livestock taken, homes destroyed, and people slaughtered. Women were often victims of violence. Children were left to starve. War did not discriminate. Even justice was terrifying. There were few real laws, and trials often meant being tortured into confessing crimes you may not have committed. Trial by ordeal was common. People were forced to hold hot irons or thrown into rivers. If you sank, you were innocent. If you floated, you were guilty. Punishments were public and brutal. Executions were festivals. Crowds cheered while people were hanged, burned, or drawn and quartered. For minor crimes, humiliation was the tool of choice. People were locked in stocks or dunked in rivers in front of jeering townsfolk. Education was rare. Most peasants were illiterate. The church controlled nearly all knowledge. Superstition filled the gaps where understanding did not exist. People believed in witches, demons, and curses. A bad harvest might be blamed on a neighbor. An illness might mean someone nearby was consorting with the devil. The result was often fear, violence, and sometimes execution. Childhood was not an escape. Children worked almost as soon as they could walk. By 7 or 8, many were in the fields, apprenticed to a trade, or helping in the home. Death claimed many before they reached adulthood. Life expectancy for the average person hovered between 30 and 40 years, if they were lucky. Despite all this, people endured. Families formed. Communities supported one another the best they could. Music, stories, festivals, and faith gave them something to hold on to. And from these brutal, dark centuries, a foundation for the modern world slowly began to rise. The Middle Ages were not a time of glory or romantic knights in shining armor. They were a test of human endurance. And for most people, just surviving one day in the medieval world was nothing short of heroic.